Joining me now to talk more about the developments in Ukraine, Major John Spencer, the chair of the Urban Warfare Studies with the Madison Policy Forum. Great to have you with us this morning. It feels as though Ukraine has the upper hand now, but from a long way away from the war zone. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. This is really a battle of quality versus quantity. And I would even venture to say on the front, the quantity is actually in question as well. But the Ukrainian military, everything I'm seeing is the quality is just far beyond what's now a broken Russian military.
So how does Putin get out of this? Is he running out of options?
Absolutely. I mean, this war was lost back in April when he tried to do a regime change in Ukraine. And really, he's almost becoming irrational at this point. There just makes no sense to continue his illegal war. I mean, claiming territories his that isn't even in his control. I mean, he's done a lot of work in 7 months. He took Russia from a global actor on the global stage with relationships around the world to now on the road, basically on the road to be a rogue nation, failed state.
Yeah, irreparable damage. Certainly. Does that mean that a nuclear threat is more imminent as he runs out of options?
I don't think so. I think the West, to include the United States, have signaled, continue to signal in back channels, don't do it. It wouldn't lead to his goals in Ukraine. It would lead to him being removed. It would lead to the end of the Russian Federation as we know it today. I mean, I think he's still rational. He's evil, but he's rational, and everybody is signaling, which is the right thing. Don't do it, because there's no win for him if he tried to. So I personally think that he won't do that.
Major, talk about some of the discussions, to the best of your knowledge, that are happening behind closed doors right now. What options do U.S. authorities have to negotiate with Putin at this point? What would he want? What would work to back him out of this war and this attack?
So, I mean, clearly there's still diplomatic channels open, and we want that with everybody in the world, to send a clear message of what would happen if this did escalate beyond his illegal invasion and genocide, really what he's doing in Ukraine. I mean, diplomatically, Putin is a autocrat. He could decide tomorrow that he's lost enough and withdraw and call a win, and that he's going to focus on the Russian Federation. I mean, just imagine. So he says he sent 200,000 soldiers to Ukraine, really draftees, but there's reports of up to 400,000, 700,000 men fleeing Russia. I mean, I think the message has to be clear. Just state the facts of what's happening to Russia as a state. And if he is a true leader, he wants, should be his ultimate goal, right? The health, the welfare of the state and his regime, even his power. Those messages can be crafted skillfully to send that message. I mean, this doesn't have to, there is no sue for peace. Putin could stop this tomorrow if he really wanted to and not lose face. That's not the way it works.
How much of this is about power and how much of it is about losing face?
So I think it's absolutely about power. His ideals of imperialism, reinstating the power of the Soviet Union, but he's already lost that. So saving face, I don't think that has anything to do with it. I mean, he's already facing domestic dissent, which many people didn't think was possible. I mean, those hundreds of thousands of men that left, the protests, the diplomats falling out of windows, he needs to make a rational decision. And it's not about saving face, it's about saving his power to control the Russian state.
Real quickly, Major, ever since the Russians invaded Ukraine, war crimes have been a major concern right now. Ukrainian officials have that official number at about 34,000. What constitutes a war crime, and how is it prosecuted?
Sure. So a war crime is pretty straightforward, although what's happened in Ukraine is wars against humanity and genocide. But war crimes in international law is uniformed personnel, the Russian military, conducting crimes against the stated international humanitarian laws of armed conflict, targeting civilians, tying civilians with their hands behind their head and shooting them in the head. It's in the thousands, but I mean, we're seeing pictures now of liberated areas where like buckets full of gold teeth that are really symptomatic of what's happening in remembering Nazis.
No, it is horrific, what we're seeing out of this war zone. Major Spencer, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, what